Hello and welcome to our webinar, Providing Late-Stage Alzheimer's Care with a Namaste Care Approach. My name is Mike Bias. I'm with the Alzheimer's Association coming to you from Illinois. And before I introduce our speaker, I want to take a moment to let you know how to get the most out of this webinar if you're joining us live. Now, if you're joining us live, all the way at the bottom of your screen, the Q&A pod is active, and that is confidential. Anything that you type into the Q&A pod, both your name and your comment or question, can only be seen by myself and the speaker. No one else can see your name or your question. So let's just start this off by let's have you type your zip code into the Q&A pod below. We've got people registered for today's webinar from all over the country, literally from California to Florida and up in New York. So we'd love to see what your zip code is to see who's joining us today. Now, the second thing is Joyce Samard, who is our speaker, would love to know why, what brought you here today to this webinar. So there's a little poll up here. Would you like to let us know why you're interested in late-term care? The choices: you're a professional, you're a family caregiver, you're a family member, or something else. So if you want to take a second and just click, if you're joining us live, on the poll so we can get an idea of who is joining us and what the majority of people are interested in, I would appreciate that. Now, while you're doing that, I'd like to introduce Joyce. Joyce Samard is an adjunct associate professor in the School of Nursing, University of Western Sydney, Australia, and a private geriatric consultant. She resides in Land O'Lakes, Florida. She's been involved in long-term care for 37 years, serving as Alzheimer's specialist for many healthcare companies, providing services in skilled nursing homes, assisted living communities, and hospice organizations. Ms. Samard has written numerous articles and chapters in healthcare books and has authored 3 books: The Magic Tape Recorder, a book for children about Alzheimer's disease, and the End of Life Namaste Care program for people with dementia, which is now in its 2nd edition. Welcome, Joyce. How are you doing today?
I'm fine. Thank you so much for inviting me to do this.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and let everybody see the results. It looks like just over 60% of the people joining us today are professionals, and the rest is split between family members and family caregivers. So excellent. I'll go ahead and turn off my webcam, and I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for joining this webinar today. I think this is my first one, so I'm very excited and a little nervous about it. I appreciate your feedback when it's over so that I can improve. We're doing it again this afternoon, and the only way is up. So here I go. When you even just talk about dementia, probably most seniors are most afraid of developing some type of dementia. And this was a study that was showing that more people were frightened of getting dementia than were getting cancer. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of good news. Look at the numbers of people. And this is a slide I always dislike using, because every time I do a new seminar or speech, I have to go and check and see if that first bullet point has changed. And oftentimes it does. And look at that, 5 million Americans. And probably more, because many are just not even diagnosed. And when you're looking at the last 2 bullet points, 80% of residents in nursing facilities have memory loss, and 70% in assisted living. And most of the staff say it's more like in the 90 percentile for both of them. So we're talking about dementia just being such a part of our lives as we get older, and certainly professionals in nursing homes and assisted living communities or any other residential community. It was first discovered by Dr. Alzheimer over 100 years ago, when he had a woman named August D. And she had this memory loss, and he couldn't quite understand what it was. She actually said to Dr. Alzheimer, and this is in his doctor's notes, that she told him, "I have lost myself." Now, this was over 100 years ago, and can't you see the people you work with now saying the same thing? I have lost myself. Well, when she died, he kept her brain and he put it under a microscope. And you can imagine at that time, microscopes were very, very basic. And also, it's interesting that Dr. Alzheimer's did keep her brain. And probably 15 or 20 years ago now, I was at a conference and I met a scientist who actually took the brain that Dr. Alzheimer's kept. So this is over 100 years ago. And he put it under a modern telescope or microscope. And he did say that she, in fact, had Alzheimer's disease. And I think this is an amazing slide. Every time I see it, it's so graphic, showing what happens to the brain when you do have Alzheimer's disease. It literally shrinks. And of all of the irreversible dementias, as you can see, by far, Alzheimer's disease is the most prevalent. And there's no cure on the horizon. And I don't know if you read, but I guess it was last summer, Pfizer put out a public release saying that they were not even going to explore medications for Alzheimer's disease anymore because they felt that there was just no cure on the horizon and it was not a good use of their money to do on anything on finding a cure or finding a medication that would significantly slow the progression of Alzheimer's disease. So, what's the good news? The good news is that you're here watching. And as Mahatma Gandhi said, you must be the change you want to see in the world. And all of you, everyone listening today, I hope if there's a takeaway, it's the positive. We can't cure the disease, we can't slow down the progression, but what we can do is help people live with quality in their lives, literally until they take their last breath. Look at her face. I was with a hospice organization, and she died several hours after this picture was taken. But look at, I had just said, oh, I have some lovely cranberry juice, and I know it's your favorite. And I put a little bit on her lips so she could taste it. And look at her, she took a sip of it. And look at the smile on her face. So literally, until they take their last breath, we can have quality in their lives. Well, a little bit about me and how in the world I got into working with people who have Alzheimer's disease. I spent my growing years, I don't say grow up because I think I'm still trying to do that, in Concord, New Hampshire. And I got married and I had a bunch of children. I had been told I wasn't smart enough to go to college. And so when all of my children were in school, I ended up taking babies that were going to be adopted. And I would take them when they were 5 days old and keep them until they were about 6 weeks old, and then they were adopted. And then the baby supply kind of went away, and I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. And I ended up going to school. I went to Ithaca College and became a social worker. And actually, I used to be a brunette. That was before I became a natural blonde. And I started out in Ithaca working in a nursing home. I wanted to work with children because, as I'd mentioned to you, I'd been a foster mother for so long and had a bunch of my own children. So I thought that that was going to be what I would end up doing, is perhaps being a social worker for foster care. But I was in Ithaca, New York, and Cornell University is there. And there were many women social workers who were going to work while their husbands were going to school at Cornell. And there wasn't one single social work job opened in the government in Ithaca, New York. And I had a professor who got a call from a nursing home administrator who said, I don't want to put an ad in the paper because I'll get too many responses. But if you've got someone a little bit more mature in your social work class, I need a social worker in my nursing home. And that's how I ended up becoming a social worker and working with seniors. And then I moved to St. Louis Park, Minnesota. And at that time, if you can imagine, for the most part, people in nursing homes were alert and oriented. I would have them waiting outside my office to talk about their feelings when I came in the morning. And I did support groups and discharge planning, and I ran a dancing class, and we did reality orientation 24/7. And that was what it was like way back in the 70s. And so I ended up providing activity programs for people that started to have some memory loss, because I'm a social worker, and doing social work and counseling with somebody who had memory loss was just not working. But I realized that if they were busy in an activity, as you can see in this slide, and you can see they had name tags on so they could call each other by name. And I thought if they were engaged in an activity, they were happy and they were really doing what I was trying to do as a social worker, give them some quality of life in spite of their memory loss. And so I took the road less traveled. I became a social work consultant, but I mostly spent my time developing activity programs for people with very early and moderate Alzheimer's disease. And this was a time when large nursing home companies began to develop. One company, Hillhaven, that I started working with, they had 300 homes when I started working with them, and 3 months later, or 3 years later rather, they had 1,200 homes. So it was a big business at the time. And so I did that for many years until the last company I went with had to declare bankruptcy. And here I was, a consultant with no work. And I met a social worker at a conference, and she had asked me if I had time, would I visit her nursing home? She said she had a number of people in a dementia unit, and she didn't know what to do with them. She had just been assigned the director of the department. So off I went to Bennington, Vermont. And for a change, rather than going in and doing activity programs as I used to do, and unfortunately it still happen in nursing homes, where there's a program and then there's nothing for an hour or two, and then there's another program and then nothing. And when nothing is happening with people who have memory loss, that's when everything is happening. Because somebody with memory loss rarely will self-initiate an activity. And when they're not engaged, this is when they're wandering, when they're pacing, when they're sleeping, when they're falling. And so I realized that managing the behaviors that were occurring when these were happening was not giving them medication, but what if we just did continuous activities, one after another, so there wouldn't be a lag time between the activities. And I ended up developing something called a club. Now, if you recall, this was a veterans home, so all of the residents had belonged to an officers club or a non-commissioned officers club. So I wanted it to be normal, so that I would say, "Oh, Mike, it's time to wake up. Your friends are waiting for you in the club." And so you would have breakfast, and I had, as you can see, a volunteer activity, and we did one program after another. And it just worked out really, really well. We were able to decrease the use of psychotropic medications, as you can see. And look at this, the effect of falls in Dublin. We were able to reduce them from 16 falls to 6 falls in 6 months. And we had fewer call-ins, the staff, much lower staff turnover, because the staff was so frustrated that they didn't know what to do with somebody who had memory loss. And if they weren't engaged in an activity and they had the behaviors that were causing staff to have to do some type of intervention, you had a lot of staff that just sometimes just didn't have the desire to go to work, or they would quit and join another nursing home and think that things were going to be different, but of course they didn't. So we had this lower staff turnover because the staff saw the residents were busy and happy. And it's a business. Nursing homes and assisted living are businesses, And so if you can imagine, you had lower staff turnover, and when families came to take a tour of your building, they saw happy residents. And so we had increased the census. And the social workers said they had fewer calls their from family members who were unhappy about things, and they had excellent surveys. I actually had an interesting experience where one of the nursing homes that was doing the club had a survey that the surveyor was so impressed with the club, she asked permission to let other nursing homes know that they could come and visit and learn how to do it. So that was quite a compliment, as you can imagine. And then I thought it was probably time for me to retire because I was old then, and I thought, okay, this is it. I'm just going to retire after doing the club. And then I got a call from the administrator, and he said, Joyce, you really need to come back because not not even when we've got residents that, the club is just going on and it's a wonderful program, but we've got residents who have passed the point of being able to participate in any of these activities. And he said there's just no quality of life. And I looked at them and I thought, you know what? They're not really living, they're existing. We're keeping them clean and fed and changed, and oftentimes sitting in front of a television set where they're sound asleep. And then, of course, they're awake at 2 o'clock in the morning, and so they're given a sleeping pill. So he said, could you please come back? These are people with, and now we know it as advanced dementia, of the advanced Alzheimer's disease. But he said, you know, it's just a time when we need something positive to be talking to the families about, because we're getting smarter about the futility of CPR, tube feeding, and hospitalizing people with advanced dementia. So we were getting families to not have these initiated. And so what was happening was the families are saying, okay, so now you're telling us not to hospitalize, not to tube feed, not to do CPR, and now they're also not able to participate in the club. Um, isn't there something you can do? And I wanted to figure out what to do. And so I realized that they needed their own activity program. And of course, if you are working in activities, you know that it needs to have a name. And so I came up with the word namaste. And I was reading something, and I have no idea what I was reading, but it said namaste, to honor the spirit within. And I thought, bingo, that's a perfect name. I had to add care because you can't copyright namaste. It's a greeting. It's like hello. You can't copyright that. So that's why I added care to it. So that's how namaste got its name. And I hope you'll see that namaste um, honors the resident, so the person who's receiving the program, in every single aspect of the group program and the initial program. I realized that we needed to have some standards or some principles, and there are two in Namaste. One is the environment, because people with dementia are really impacted by what's going on around them. One of the reasons why people, I think, with dementia have such a hard time or the staff has such a hard time giving them a shower, because many times the shower rooms, the bathing rooms in a nursing home are frightening looking, and they don't understand what it is they're supposed to be doing in that space. So I thought, what do I want for Namaste? I want people to feel a sense of calm, of peace. And so we try to find a space that's as free from distractions as possible. And we play beautiful music, and we oftentimes use lavender. Uh, there have been some studies that show the scent of lavender produces a sense of calmness. So we use that. One one family member was walking into one of the Namaste rooms where I was consulting, and she said, "When I walk into the Namaste room, I feel as if I'm being enveloped in a giant hug." And I thought, perfect description. The other principle, or here's just one of the rooms. And this is a room, and what's important about this is it's in a nursing home that is mature. Well, it's an old building. And they only had one space for all activities, and that was also where they had to have their meals. So it was amazing with housekeeping assistants and the nursing assistants helping us. We fed the residents and then they were all taken out into the corridor. Housekeeping came in and immediately cleaned the floor, pushed back all the tables. We put the music on, we lowered the lights, we did the lavender, and we brought everyone back in to the room. So it doesn't have to be the best situation. You make the best out of any situation, and that's what we did here in this mature nursing home. The second principle is what I call the loving touch approach. And unfortunately, as we know, many times nursing homes and assisted living communities are not well staffed. A recent study showed something like 80% of nursing homes did not have the optimal staff during the 7 to 3 shift. And so you've got very wonderfully good-hearted nursing aides that come in. And as we know, so many of the residents now are total care, and everything they do is hurried. They've got to get up however many people. Some homes have a 1 to 12 ratio, which is just astronomical when you think of how much needs to happen in the morning to get 10 or 12 residents up and dressed, changed, and in the dining room for their breakfast. So one of the principles in Namaste Care is that nothing is hurried. Everything is done with a loving touch approach. So that person is there. You can feel them. And even the few residents that you can't physically touch, they don't want to be touched, you can touch them with your whole body. And it's a very important part of Namaste. Unhurried touch to all interactions. There. Loving touch. Loving touch. And so, just very briefly, I'm going to go over all pieces of this, but just to talk about it, it's a sensory-based program, and I developed it for people who couldn't participate anymore in traditional activities. And when I first started it, I was very blessed to work with a company that had Namaste offered along with the club every day, 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon. And that became the standard for Namaste Care. What I've realized lately is that 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon every day is not realistic for most nursing homes and assisted living communities. So now I'm just saying offered every day or as often as possible. And the meaningful activities, as you're going to see, are not word games and exercises, because those are activities that people with advanced dementia can no longer participate in. So we're doing activities of daily living, and they are the activities offered in Namaste. And the other piece of that is continuous hydration. The main reason why people with advanced dementia are admitted to hospitals are because of urinary tract infections. They simply don't drink enough. And you've got, an overworked staff trying to give people their drinks and I'll take a little sip and a little sip and a little sip. And so what we do in Namaste is as soon as they come in the room, they are offered a beverage, and they're continuously offered beverages throughout the program. And this is in the group program as well as the individual program. So hydration is a very important part of Namaste Care. So, what is it like in a typical day in a nursing home? The residents wake up and they receive their AM care. They're usually changed, they're dressed, they're taken to breakfast, and then someone prepares the Namaste care room. And sometimes we have a Namaste carer who is an additional staff position, but most of the time, one of the nursing assistants becomes the Namaste carer. And what we do is we bring as many residents in the Namaste care room as are in one assignment. So, say it's 12 residents. So, I'm taking an aide off from the general care in the nursing home. They're assigned to the Namaste care room, but you've got 12 residents in there, so it doesn't add a lot of extra work for the aides who are not in the Namaste room taking care of the residents who are not in the Namaste room. So, and again, we're preparing it by, lowering the lights and playing beautiful music and scenting with lavender and making sure that we have food and beverages. And then the residents are welcomed individually on a very special way. And here's just one room that I think this is in Ohio that we made. It was a family room, and we made it into a Namaste room in the morning and the afternoon. And then when it's not used for Namaste, it's used for families. This is a assisted living, Arden Courts. And as you can see from the slide, they have this big area here that's open so that the staff can always be aware of what's going on with the residents. But in Namaste, that was very distracting. The residents could see people walking by. So they simply put a shade in and they put a drape in. So when we do Namaste in that room, the shade is pulled, the drape is there, and so the residents are not distracted by people walking by. And when it's over, we pull the shade up, we pull the drapes back, and it becomes a regular living room. And so we've got the room going, and now it's time for the residents to come in. And each person, as they come in, is respected. I said to honor the spirit within. And so my husband is a physician. So when Dr. Volitzer comes in, I would shake his hand and say, Dr. Volitzer, welcome. We're so glad that you're able to take time from your busy practice and be with us today. And Grandma Joyce is going to get a hug. So everyone that comes in is greeted in a way that is just special for them. And then we tuck a blanket or a quilt, something very, very soft around them. Most of the time, people with advanced dementia are cold, and those blankets are just so comforting. We try to find blankets that are also very personal. So perhaps you'd have one with your football logo, your football team logo on it. I love butterflies. As you can see behind me, I've got my butterfly picture in my little room that I call my Namaste room in my home. And so they are, of course, kept in a plastic container of some type with a name on it, so we don't have to worry about infection control issues. We might use extra towels to position a person, and we're assessing them for pain, because you can't have quality of life if you're in pain. So here we are taking the shoes off because they're not ambulatory anymore. Now here's a good example of a resident that was brought in like this. As you can see, very contractured. And this is called a PANAD scale. And actually, my husband and his nursing assistants in Bedford, Massachusetts, adapted this scale or developed this scale for their residents with advanced dementia who could not tell you that they were in pain. They were screaming, and you didn't know if they were in pain or if it was some sort of disruptive vocalization, something else was bothering them. And what he discovered was that if you showed them the sad face and the happy face, if they were in pain, they might point to the happy face because that's how they wanted to feel. So this is available on the internet. It's not copyrighted. So if you're interested, please look it up. It's called the PANAD scale. And so we assessed her, and snuggled her down. And I didn't move to the next person until she was as comfortable as possible. And then the hydration I mentioned to you. So everyone who comes in is given their own juice, and we do have a list of residents that have any kind of swallowing problems, so that they would be adjusted. They would not have a problem choking, because the whatever they're drinking is appropriate for them. And here she is. I show this slide because I like to point out that you don't ask somebody with Alzheimer's disease a yes or no question if you don't want the answer to be no. So the aide had gone over and said, "Would you like a drink?" And she said no. But she, of course, said no to most everything, and she had no clue what a drink meant. So I went over and I said, "I have some cranberry juice, and I know you love this juice." And she drank the whole thing down in one sip. All right, so now we've got most people in the room, and I've greeted everybody. Everyone has been assessed for pain. I've given them something to drink, and now I'm going to go to one resident, and I'm going to wash her face. I'm not going to wear gloves, although having said that, now with the virus, we are probably wearing gloves now. But for the most part, in normal times, Namaste is skin to skin. And if you can see, look at her name tag. Now the company wants you to wear, and the state wants you to wear a name tag with your, your position and perhaps the company logo and your picture, but residents can't see your name. And so while Janet was still wearing the company name tag, she had this one on too, and at a place where if the resident opened her eyes, she could see that it was Janet and she could call her by name. And one of the things that I discovered quite by accident is Pond's Cold Cream Face Moisturizer hasn't changed its look. The jar is the same that has been since it was discovered almost probably 60, 70 years ago now. And so we use that as reminiscence as well as a moisturizer for the face. So I showed this to this particular resident, and she was nonverbal. I didn't know that. I was a consultant at the time. And I just showed it to her, and she went, "Oh, Pond's, I've used it my entire life, or I'd look like a prune now." And the staff was saying, "She doesn't talk." I usually use a Q-tip for infection control purposes because and for financial purposes, I don't usually have one for every resident. So I get a big jar of Pond's and I use the Q-tip just once and then dispose of it in a plastic bag. And just she's got the Q-tip, and again, she's not using gloves. And I looked at this woman's face, and she had all of these skin problems, cancers on her face. And I thought, I'll bet no one washes her face and touches her without using gloves unless she's in the Namaste room. And she was clearly so pleased to be touched. And this is a joke on me. I was doing Namaste. I was teaching it in this nursing home, and I was doing the woman's face with Pond's Cold Cream, and I never thought about massaging a man's face. And I turned around, and here's a nursing assistant, and what she had was just an unscented moisturizer, and she's doing this man's face, and he's loving it. So I continue to learn from the experts, and they are the nursing assistants. And fussing with hair. And I'm not sure why, but fussing with someone's hair seems to be the most pleasurable activity that we do in Namaste. And you can look at her face. And just fussing, whether you do it with a comb or whether you do it with your fingers. And here was a woman that had lost all of her hair. And as you can see, the Namaste carer is just massaging her scalp. and she's just the peace that came over this woman as the aide was doing this was just remarkable. And I'm wondering if that's something that you might remember your mom doing for you when you were really little, but just a beautiful, beautiful way to be remembered. Um, Recently, I had a dear friend of mine who was dying, and it was a remarkable time for me because I'm revising the Namaste Care book, and I was writing a chapter on making a transition. And I like to refer to that rather than when somebody is actively dying. And as I was writing the chapter, my friend's husband would call me and say, um, Jackie is really, really agitated. Could you come over? And I would leave my computer and I would go and I would do namaste for Jackie. And always started by touching her hair. And she would open her eyes and she would say, I love you. I love you too. And she was reacting and comforted by namaste until 5 days before she died. And then she was in a very deep coma. And at least I couldn't see there was any reaction, but that didn't stop me from doing namaste um, almost until the day she died. Okay, and now I show this slide because we do sometimes have residents whose hands are contractured, as you can see, and you've got nursing assistants who are, like pulling their hands trying to open it because you can imagine it gets smelly. And so I was trying to figure a way to see, is there a way that we could help open her hand in namaste? So I got a basin of water and put her hands in, and then I just took water, kind of like made a waterfall over her hand, and her hand just opened. Look at, just opened. So we were able to really help nursing with moisturizing, cleaning the person's hand, and moisturizing it even when they were all clenched. And then a shave. And a lot of times a man who has Alzheimer's disease will not know what it means to get a shave. And so now I'm a man and I've got a nursing assistant who's busy, 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 and has an electric razor and is coming at me. Zzz! And so I'm slapping, I'm hitting, I'm trying to get her away because what I remember is the old-fashioned shave. And so occasionally in Namaste, we'll have the Namaste carer take some time. And as you can see, she's giving him an old-fashioned shave, and he's absolutely loving it, just loving it. And here's a woman whose family said that that she really loved having makeup on. So when she came into Namaste, we put her lipstick on. Who's that? And I know in some of the Alzheimer's programs, they take the mirrors out of the bathrooms because they'll have a resident go in and look in the mirror and not know who that old person is in the mirror. I should probably do that myself. All right. And now in terms of hydration, you can see that very easy to serve and not expensive uh, hydration. And again, constant hydration with juice or water. And I discovered using lollipops really quite by accident. I know that residents usually like sweets, and so I would know that anybody in danger of choking, and this particular resident was not in danger of choking, but they hesitated bringing her into Namaste because all she said was, I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home. And she said that almost all day, every day. So they brought her into the Namaste room. And of course, I'm like we can't have her in here because she's going to be disruptive. And the aide looked at me and he said, could we at least try? I don't know what else to do. I would like to help her, but nothing seems to work. And I thought, all right. So I gave her a lollipop. And when I gave her a lollipop, of course, she sucked on the lollipop and no longer said, I want to go home. And when she finished it, I want to go home. I want to go home. I gave her another. And it was very interesting. Over the weeks that she was in Namaste, gradually we didn't have to give her, 3, 4, 5 lollipops while she was in. Even when she didn't have a lollipop in her mouth, she stopped the vocalization of "I want to go home." So we brought her some peace. And oranges, and if you quarter them, and they can suck on them. And what pleasure this man had from getting a slice of orange. And I guess this is just another moment to say in Namaste, we do such basic things. People say, how do you do this? Is it so complicated? And I say, it's not rocket science. I am definitely not smart enough to be a rocket scientist. It's just really all about the basics and about caring. And you see, she doesn't have gloves on and she's talking to him and she knows that his pleasure is having sucking on that orange. And that's a big deal for him. Pleasure and honoring his spirit, to honor the spirit within. And sometimes we give them a friend. And I don't use stuffed elephants because elephants don't come that small. So I give them realistic dogs. Men particularly like dogs or kittens or realistic dolls. And as you can see, here's a dog that is very plush. I don't get the dogs that breathe or the cats that breathe because the mechanism makes them hard. And what I've discovered is that they like to, the men especially like to pet the dog. And here was a resident uh, who was nonverbal, and there he's taking care of the dog. And when I walked over to him, I said, how lucky the dog was to have him taking care of him. And this nonverbal man looked up and he said, do you think he likes me? I said, sure he does. So when he comes into the Namaste room, we give him his dog. And here was a woman, when she came in the room, she enjoyed holding a baby and as lifelike as possible. And by the way, because of infection control, the baby, when she leaves to have lunch, we tell her the baby has to go for a nap. And we put the baby in a plastic bag, and the bag is marked with her name, as the dog is for the gentleman. So we don't have a problem with infection control. I find the realistic dogs on Amazon.com, and they're under $20. And they're so real that I actually put one on the carpet in my home. And my neighbor brought her little dog, who's a Shih Tzu, over, and Ella came in and looked at my stuffed animal dog and barked at it. So it really is realistic. And I'm a volunteer at the Veterans Home, or at least have been until now. Of course, volunteers are not allowed into the nursing homes, but I only have men in my group. And I have 8 men, and every single one of them I bought a dog for. And they just have such pleasure over petting the dog, holding the dog, kissing the dog. It's just amazing. Really does make a difference. $20 is not very much money when you are looking at the pleasure that it brings to people. And here she with her realistic doll. So basically in the morning, you've got the Namaste person going from resident to resident to resident. And I don't have enough staff, so I can do one-to-one. I usually just have one Namaste carer in the room. And the people in the room hear my voice because I'm talking as I'm going around. They sense that I'm going from person to person to person. And so what we found is that they're not sleeping as they might be if they're not involved in Namaste. And so I think you'll see one of the studies will show we have a decreased use of sleeping medication because we're keeping them awake. Now it's right before lunch. Now remember, we've got the lavender and we've got the calm music and we've got the lights turned down. And now we want to wake them up and get them ready for lunch. And so I'm going to turn up the lights and I'm going to play happy music. Uh, and it depends. I oftentimes will play big band dance music. That's music that many of the seniors remember in their younger days when they used to go to dances. Um, and if I'm doing it in another country, it's ethnic music, whatever is popular. You know, in Germany we do polka music, and that's what really makes a difference in Germany. And then, I talk about the day and I say, bring the outside inside. And just think when you've got people that rarely, if ever, get to go outside. And so in New England in the fall, we might bring some leaves that have fallen from the trees. Around Christmas time, I can get branches of Christmas trees, uh, roses in the summer, uh, just fun things, and things that they might remember once you take them around. And they're all very sensory or happy things. I have a ball doing with a clown nose that's kind of fun to do. Um, this was fun. I was in Massachusetts and it happened to be snowing that day. So the aide asked if I would stay with the residents, and she took a basin and ran outside and got snow. And some of the residents started to make snowballs with it. So a good way to bring the outside inside, and some gourds that are very tactile. There we go. And so this is what you do, and they do whatever record keeping needs to happen. And we can do room visits, and we just have a cart that is as home-like as possible and bring it to the bedside. In the afternoon, we might do a nature video. Maybe I'll soak feet. We can do range of motion. See, we're doing her legs. She was getting a facial. So we did range of motion to dance music. So in the afternoon, we do things that are different. And she loves hats. So in the afternoon, we put some pretty hats on the ladies. And the afternoon is when families visit. And so here, this shows a gentleman who had been coming in to see his wife. And the staff said they never saw her really look at him with any kind of remembering, reminiscence. And so I gave him some hand lotion and asked him if he'd like to massage his wife's hand. And he did. And she looked at him with such love that the staff started to cry. They'd never seen her react to him. And beautiful moment. So it gives the family something to do. And hand massage is perfect. And then, of course, we've got our late afternoon paperwork. And here are some of the outcomes of, as you can see, the use of antipsychotic medication. So we've been very fortunate to have grants in many countries looking at the outcomes of Namaste. And you can see decrease in use of antipsychotics, antidepressants, and hypnotics. And look at this. This was at the end of the 6 months, not one resident was on an antipsychotic or a hypnotic. So that was pretty incredible to see. And the pain scores went down. And as I mentioned to you, my husband is the person who developed the pain ad, and he has no idea why the pain ad scales went down. But he thought maybe just being so comfortable and relaxed decreased the use of need for any kind of pain medication. And of course, we had some really nice business outcomes, especially surveys. And oftentimes we get good press coverage too, of course, with approval from families, that we could cover the families being interviewed. And sometimes the press would actually come in and take some pictures of us doing Namaste. All good, all good. And as I said, it doesn't require anything that's expensive. Supplies are not expensive at all. The only thing that would be expensive if you don't have reclining wheelchairs, but hopefully you do for people with advanced dementia. So I was doing the group program and going across the country giving uh, seminars, and I was approached by Seasons Hospice, and they said, "Do you think you could put Namaste Care in a bag and bring it to the bedside?" And I said, "I have no clue how to do that, um, but I'd love to try." And now, with the pandemic, the nursing homes are canceling most of the group programs. Residents are not having dinner together. Families are not allowed to visit. As I mentioned, I'm not allowed to visit as a volunteer. And so we're bringing Namaste Care to the bedside. So I've been and hopefully you'll help me do this by teaching nursing assistants to just take some time and bring Namaste to a resident in their rooms, or if families are allowed to go in, to be teaching them how to bring Namaste, how they can so easily do the hand massage, that they can turn off the television set, they can lower the lights, they can squirt lavender on any fabric will hold the scent of lavender. And as I mentioned, turning off the TV and putting a, I love this, putting a sign on the door. One of the nursing assistants developed this sign when she was doing it: Namaste Care taking place, enter gently. And again, this unhurried, loving touch. Now, what we're doing now, unfortunately, we're having to wear gloves and sometimes masks and a protective gown and washing hands. And what you simply need to do is to continue to be present. So in spite of the fact that I may have something here, you can see my eyes, and I really feel that you can sense my presence even if I have a gown, even if I have a mask. Just being present for them in your whole spirit makes a huge difference. And of course, making sure that any item that you're using would be sanitized when you leave. And then so here we've got a hospice person doing the individual program, and they put everything in a bag. And again, this is before the coronavirus, so she doesn't have gloves on, but she's greeting the person just as we do in a group program, calling her by name, giving her a kiss. And this particular resident is in a room with another resident, so we're pulling the privacy curtain around. I call it cocooning. And we're checking for any pain. She's looking at her and using the pain ed scale. And then if there is any problem with pain, a nurse is called immediately. So the nurse in the facility is called, as well as the hospice nurse. So we know that you cannot have quality of life if you're in pain. So that's really the makes a huge difference when we know that the people we're caring for and caring about are not in pain. And we used a CD player, and now, of course, most of the aides have a cell phone with music, so we're not using CD players most of the time. And we're doing the hydration. So just as we do in the group program, people are offered a beverage continually through our visit. And we're making sure that she likes the smell of lavender. Occasionally you'll find someone that doesn't. And so you can use, especially seasonal, lilac, roses, cinnamon when it's cold. And they're really not expensive. You can buy scents very inexpensively. She's spraying. And now she's doing the hand massage. And as you can see, she's talking to the resident as she's offering the hand massage, telling her how special she is and how happy she is to be there. And here she's washing her face with a warm cloth and using Pond's. Sorry, I'm not sure why. Oh, there it goes. Okay. Um, and this particular hospice has music therapists, so we're bringing music to people individually. And music, as you know, music works. They're all having such a great time with singing them. And then as I'm leaving, I'm also telling her how happy that I am that I was able to be with her, how special. And I always find something special. She has the most beautiful hair. She has the best smile. He always has, a nice shirt on, uh, so handsome. Just something that is special for each of the people that you're offering Namaste care to. Woo, I did really well, Mike, didn't I? It's and I'm not sure if there are any questions here. Mike, can you come back on?
I certainly can. Great. Well, if you have any questions, all you need to do is type them into the Q&A pod if you're joining us live. And I will read those in a minute. One person will be sharing this recording or the presentation with all of us, and the answer is yes. If you go to alzwebinars.org, a day or two after this live recording, there will be, after this live webinar, there will be a recording of the webinar, and underneath the link where you click to view the webinar, there will be a link to download the notes, which is everything that you see on the screen. Before we get into questions, I do want to let you all know a 7 nationwide helpline at 800-272-3900. We really recommend that you get out your smartphone and put that in here so that when you need it, you've got it. 800-272-3900. And the other thing, of course, you can go to alz.org. You can go there anytime, day or night, and let your fingers do the walking. And if you can't find something, because everything that you need to know is there, just call the helpline and they'll tell you where to click. So a few questions for Joyce. I think someone here is concerned about the Namaste. Namaste is a term that is used in yoga, and it's linked with, I think, is it Hinduism? Anyway, the question is, does Namaste care have any religious, not to be confused with spiritual, connections?
No, it doesn't. And really, I had no clue that I had never taken a yoga class, and I first started to do presentations, and I would say namaste, and a lot of the women in the audience would start to laugh and smile. And then afterwards, somebody said something about a yoga class, and I didn't realize that. But it was really too late to change it, and it doesn't have anything other than, as I said, namaste, to honor the spirit within.
Great.
I did go to India. I have to tell you. And everywhere we went in New Delhi or Varanasi, the holy city, everywhere we went, people were saying to me, namaste, namaste. And I said to my husband, I guess they all read my book.
There you go. Maybe they have. And if they've sold 1 billion copies in India, you should be looking for those royalties. Great. Okay.
Anyway, I think you make 20 cents a copy.
Well, 20 cents times 1 billion would that add up?
Well, that's true.
That would add up.
That's true.
I would do the math, but I don't want to show off. I think it'd be $20 million. 20 anyway. Okay, so another question: what are the most common concerns you have seen when rolling this out? Now, clearly, it looks like there aren't any things to be concerned about, but sometimes people have objections or concerns or fears.
Oh, absolutely. The first one is nursing assistants. When we introduce it, the nursing assistants say, you're giving me one more thing to do, one more thing to be responsible for. And oftentimes I will say, let's get Namaste going. And I usually, I can have it up and running totally in 4 days and have it going. And then I'll say, all right, would you agree to do it for 2 weeks? And then at the end of 2 weeks, we'll meet again. And if you think it's too much work, we just won't do it anymore. And never has it happened that they've wanted us to stop, because what they end up seeing is the residents that they had to spend so much time with are now comfortable and not crying out, not grabbing out for other people, not falling out of their wheelchairs. And so actually, many of them have said Namaste actually makes their job easier, even though we're taking one person off, off from the floor to do it.
So a small investment reaps a huge dividend. Great. So another person asks, where can we read again the documentation about the outcomes? I think outcomes, and that's great because it's quantified. You had talked about the pain ed scale, showed there was also a reduction in medication, reduction in falls. Is that on your website, or where would they find that?
If you're interested, go ahead and email me, and I'll have my researcher husband make sure that you have all the articles. And that's interesting because I'm trying to think now if it is on the website. I have a Namaste Care website, and I'd love to have people take a look at the website. And at the very bottom of the website, on the, I believe, the first page, unless the first page has changed now with the virus. Anyways, there's a song, "Will You Care for Me?" And it was written by an activity director, and she gave me the rights to the song. This is probably 30 years ago now. And then she passed away, but she said, you can use the song. And we put pictures to it, but it's beautiful. It's "Till I'm Gone, Will You Care for Me?" It was written for nursing assistants. Beautiful, beautiful song.
Awesome. So let's to be very careful about not forgetting this. Your website is?
NamasteCare.com.
NamasteCare.com. And how do you spell com? No, I'm just kidding. All right, so NamasteCare.com. And if they don't remember your email, I'm sure that there's a link there. Contact us that they could get your email through NamasteCare.com.
Right.
Okay, so instead of going through your email and people scrambling for a pen, if you just remember NamasteCare.com, you can go there and you can get in touch with Joyce in order. Okay. I've got.
No, I was going. Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, I don't think we have any other questions. We've just got several comments. Thank you. This is very helpful. I love this. So, comments.
And thank you all for being so kind and for as I said, I've never done. This is my first one. So I appreciate your patience. And Mike, thank you and the association so much for inviting me to do this and hopefully to help people with advanced dementia not just exist, but live with quality in their life until they take their last breath.
That is so eloquently stated, and that's what we're about. We want to improve the quality of their life and respect them, and that's awesome. Well, namaste. Thank you, Joyce. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you will come again to alzwebinars.org to join us for a future webinar. Have a great day.